Right. Now, on the agenda, we have 4 amazing speakers. We have Hilda Strutt from Oxfam Novib. We have Omar Yampe from Hanoi in Paraguay. We have Annabella Lemos joining us from Mozambique. And finally, we have Corina de la Plaza, our very own GFC. After these 4 speakers present, we'll have a Q&A and a discussion, which will be open to everybody, and we'd love to hear from all of you. While the webinar is on, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll make sure to capture all of that and bring it to the Q&A as well. If we have time, we will watch a small video on some real solutions that are being implemented to climate change in different parts of the world. And then we'll have a mini wrap up where we will talk about next steps. We will share all the resources that we've discussed during this webinar, and we'll make sure that we tie up all the loose ends. All right. Okay. Right. So it looks like more people have joined. That's great. It's fantastic. It's a huge honor to have all of you here. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you, where you're joining us from, who you are, and everything. So the chat box is open. Feel free to introduce yourself through it. Please put down, please just talk to everyone, talk to the room through it. My name is Chitira Vijaykumar. I'm the communications coordinator of the Global Forest Coalition, and I'm based out of Kerala, which is in India. Welcome to this webinar titled In the Shadow of Monoculture Plantations, which is on the urgent need to redirect finance away from false climate solutions. Indigenous peoples and local communities from around the world have been very clear in communicating that the current steps that are being taken by governments and international organizations to address climate change are making things worse on the ground. In addition to this, we've seen the IPCC reports. We have seen hundreds of peer-reviewed studies, right, that demonstrate that we urgently need to reduce our emissions by at least half if we want to try to cap warming at 1.5 degrees. There was a new study, I'm sure many of you have seen it, which went viral last week, which showed that human activities have caused the Earth to exceed 6 of 9 boundaries necessary for keeping the planet healthy. Which means, and these are not my words, in the words of scientists, which means we are, in quotes, well outside the safe operating space for humanity. One of those boundaries in the study was indeed climate change. Something that I found really interesting about that study was that there was only one boundary that was not threatened. Only one. And that was atmospheric ozone. Why was that? Because all the countries in the world took decisive action to phase out destructive chemicals in recent decades, which led to ozone holes shrinking. Which gives me a lot of hope, which shows that if we take collective action, we have time. We can still make a difference. And yet, when it comes to climate change, policymakers continue to focus on plantations, carbon removals, offsets, and other false solutions to address climate change. Today, 4 stellar speakers will present to you irrefutable information and evidence on why plantations are a false solution to climate change. A quick reminder to our distinguished speakers today that you will each have the floor for about 12 minutes. I would remind you via chat when you have a couple of minutes left to go. All right. Now, we hope this webinar will make visible the corporate capture of climate policy making and what it is doing to Indigenous peoples and local communities on the ground. All right, let's get straight into it. Our first speaker for the day is Hilda Strutt. Hilda is currently the policy lead on climate justice at Oxfam Novib. She is a lifelong climate and environmental activist who has led campaigns on biodiversity, on deforestation, and climate change for several organizations, including Greenpeace and Milieu Defense. She will be framing today's event and talking to us about why the climate crisis demands real solutions. So over to you, Hilda.
Thanks, Shitira. And also from my side, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. As Shitira said, my name is Hilde Stroot. I work for Oxfam Novib. I'm a tropical forest ecologist. That's what my profession used to be. So I've spent many months in tropical forests all around the world. And I really adore and live these forests. So I'm really happy to be in this webinar and discuss and speak with you all. So I'm sure that this year you've all experienced the symptoms of consequences of climate change in the countries where you live and work. We've all felt it, really. The climate crisis is here and now, and already wrecking lives of millions of people worldwide. And every day, these devastating impacts of climate change are being felt, especially in countries vulnerable to climate change, which are also the countries that have caused, that have not caused climate change in the first place. As Shitira already mentioned, IPCC was very clear that, action to combat climate crisis need to happen now. We must drastically reduce emissions. Fossil fuel emissions need to peak by 2025. And IPCC was very clear that by 2030, our greenhouse gas emissions need to have dropped by 43%. But the IPCC was also clear that any SDG 1.5 degrees pathway must now also include carbon dioxide removals. In other words, reducing emissions is not longer enough. We also need to sequester carbon from the atmosphere in large amounts. And the longer we're waiting with reducing our emissions, the more we need to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. In other words, our carbon sinks, our oceans, our forests, they are really vital. They are really our lifeline. So you can move to slide 3 already, Shitira. Sorry, I forgot to mention to continue with slides. So it therefore makes sense to invest in ensuring that these sinks are secured. So they keep on absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. But the reality is that many of these investments that claim that have to have an objective are actually failing, or they have detrimental impacts on the environment or on communities in these areas. So the scarce money intended to fight climate change is often spent on projects that contribute little to these goals and are in many times harmful to people and the environment. So today we will zoom in on industrial tree plantations. These plantations are often presented as a way to capture CO2 and so, be a solution to climate change. But in reality, many of these projects have carbon stored, but that will ultimately end up in the atmosphere. Plantations are being locked, plantations are being burned, and the CO2 is just, released. In fact, many plantations are a source of carbon emissions when forest ecosystems are cleared for plantations. These plantations are less carbon rich than the natural ecosystems they replace, thereby depleting carbon storage, limiting carbon sinks possibilities. Also, monocultures and it says it already, with identical plants are far more vulnerable than diverse forests, and less able to withstand fires, pests, or extreme weather. So the permanency of these things is in many occasions really questionable. And then on top, and certainly not the least, these projects are in many occasions harmful for communities. People are being driven from their lands to establish plantations. Plantations compete with land use to grow food, which deepens the poverty of local communities. Harmful pesticides are being used, polluting soil and polluting water. And freshwater resources are being depleted, especially in the case where fast-growing species are being used that need large quantities of water. So all these issues cannot be ignored if we want to move towards real solutions to save the climate, save the biodiversity. And this webinar, we intend to bring the issues to the forefront in order to contribute to a change in course and work towards climate solutions that do work for climate, for environment, and for people. So I'm really honored to be here together and give the floor to the next speakers and to hear their stories and to discuss solutions to this crisis. So I think the floor is to the next speaker, Shitira.
Thank you so much, Hilda, for really framing today's event so beautifully and for reminding us why it's important that we have this conversation today. We continue to have this conversation every day. Right, so we will move on to our second speaker of the day. Omar Tiampe is a sociologist, an MSc candidate in sociology and political science at the Universidad Nacional de Asunción, and a professor and researcher at the Centro de Estudios Hanoi. He is a founding member of the Asociación Paraguaya de Sociología and a member of the working group Socio-Territorial Movements in Critical and Comparative Perspective of the Centro Latinoamericano de Ciencias Sociales. Omar is also launching his report today on the impact of monoculture plantations in Paraguay. So welcome, Omar, and over to you.
Buen día, muchas gracias Chitara por el espacio. Quería saber si se está compartiendo mi pantalla.
Sí, está compartida, se ve.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias también a Gilde por su presentación. Ahí ella decía que termina otra vez en el ambiente y en Paraguay es interesante porque la plantación de monocultivo termina en los fogones, ¿verdad? En las calderas para la seca de granos de maíz y soja transgénica. Es decir, los árboles de monocultivo de eucalipto terminan como carbón, ¿verdad? Reduciendo los costos de la cadena productiva del modelo agroganadero, ¿verdad? Bien, desde el Centro de Estudios Genioy queríamos nosotros colocar algunos elementos más bien como problematización. Decíamos, ¿qué es lo que está pasando en los territorios a los que vamos? Que hay una perversión en términos de se está generando consenso. Ya decíamos en el 2021 cuando hicimos el primer informe sobre el caso Arvaro, y después fuimos conociendo otras realidades también que están muy impactadas, digamos, de alguna manera por el avance del proceso de eucaliptación, que le decimos al avance de estas plantaciones de eucalipto en un marco más amplio de negocio forestal. Y decíamos ahí que la novedad del negocio forestal, a diferencia del negocio de la soja y del ganado, que forman parte del agronegocio, la diferencia es que utilizan recursos de marketing, ¿sí?, que generan consenso en la sociedad. Ese es ese es un peligro. Nosotros vemos como un peligro porque se presentan como una solución al cambio climático, se presentan como una oportunidad y una alternativa eh, a la situación en la que se encuentra el campesinado y los pueblos indígenas, a ofrecer trabajo, a ofrecer desarrollo y además una dimensión que también debatimos mucho con Genioy es la cooptación de los cuadros científicos, ¿sí?, que trabajan en función a sus intereses y al interés del negocio forestal. Es decir, vienen con un paquete que es muy complejo de refutar, porque en un país, ¿verdad?, en el cual la situación de crisis social, económica, y creo que hay algo que nos atraviesa a todo el globo, que es la pandemia, lo que hizo que se agudice, lo que ya estaba mal, ¿sí?, se agudice. Y los países del sur global, los más impactados en términos de soberanía alimentaria, en términos de seguridad social, en términos de desempleo, en términos de precarización del empleo, en términos de lo que nosotros decimos también la lumpenización. Mucha gente que estaba en clase media o clase baja, está más abajo y está ya en puertas de solemos decir también de actos caníbales, ¿verdad? En el sentido de que estamos a poco de que nos empecemos a devorar entre nosotros, ¿verdad? En ese marco vienen estas empresas muy finamente, con un marketing, con una propaganda muy... y genera consenso, entonces es muy complicado eh, hablar sobre esta cuestión de falsa conciencia, cómo decirle a la comunidad indígena o campesina en una situación tan vulnerada de todos sus derechos, que eso no es trabajo, ¿verdad? Eso no está pasando en los territorios. Entonces decimos ahí, para entender el negocio forestal es necesario entender en el marco, ¿sí?, de una política económica de un Estado. Por eso tomamos esta categoría de totalidad del diablo. Es necesario comprender al Paraguay, no comprender solo la iniciativa del Fondo Arbaro, el Fondo Verde para el Clima, fragmentados. Nosotros decimos, la categoría de totalidad es necesario para entender este carácter perverso cuando nuestros pueblos, cuando nosotros y nuestros pueblos no forman parte del desarrollo y la evolución y simplemente estamos subordinados a una estructura global de un sistema económico que necesita destruir el ambiente, desplazar a las comunidades para maximizar el lucro. Entonces ahí decimos, es necesaria la categoría de totalidad para comprender esto y entender esta eucaliptación o esta forestación en un marco de falsas soluciones al cambio climático. Ellos mismos generaron los niveles de deforestación, de destrucción de ecosistemas, de vulneración de la soberanía alimentaria de nuestros pueblos, y hoy vienen otra vez con la idea de resolver el problema que ocasionaron, promueven otra vez un negocio forestal. Es decir, es una salida, ¿sí?, desde la propia lógica de la acumulación. Es decir, destruyen la naturaleza, vienen a resolver, como decía también la que me antecedió en el uso de la palabra, Hilde, son la enfermedad y son el remedio, pero el remedio es peor que la enfermedad. Y ahí nosotros decimos, entonces, comprender eso, esto es una política del Estado paraguayo, de la subordinación a los intereses de una estructura más amplia, esta idea de la economía verde de los países del norte global, ¿sí? Subordina a los países del sur global a la demanda de biomasa, ¿verdad? Ellos dejan de producir eso, pero los países del sur global nos encargamos de avanzar en la destrucción de nuestros medios naturales, ¿verdad? Y ahí vemos la participación activa de estas entidades financieras como el Fondo Verde para el Clima, que tiene un rol capital en Paraguay, el Fondo Verde Arvaro y otros fondos como el Banco Holandés que financian estas falsas soluciones, ¿verdad? Decíamos con Genio, y es necesario poner ese contexto más desde la perspectiva incluso del poder, ¿verdad? Y decíamos, el negocio forestal forma parte de la historia del Paraguay, de los despojos de los bienes comunes. Sin eso no se entiende. Sin el contexto histórico y las relaciones de poder que atraviesa a este negocio forestal, es muy difícil y complejo entender el Fondo Verde para el Clima que viene al Paraguay, financia ciertos programas, ciertos proyectos, y uno dice, hasta vienen a ayudarle al Paraguay, pero si uno no pone en contexto, no se puede comprender el problema en su complejidad, ¿verdad? Entonces decimos, forma parte de la historia del despojo de los bienes comunes de 1870 a esta parte. Paraguay fue enclave, yerbatero y taninero en su momento, sojero y ganadero, ¿sí? Y hoy se anuncia un Paraguay forestal para el mundo con la adhesión del Estado. Y el Fondo Verde para el Clima, decíamos también en el año 2015, cambia la lógica a partir del Acuerdo de París, ¿verdad? Que se despliega toda esta propaganda de buenas intenciones seguro, pero de falsas soluciones. Se invierte en Proeza, que es un proyecto de reducción de la pobreza, entre comillas, pero que lo que plantea es avanzar con la plantación de eucaliptos en los territorios campesinos. Entonces decimos, desde ese tiempo a esta parte, la lógica Proeza se instala en todos los demás, en todas las demás iniciativas, ¿sí? Y eso vemos en el Fondo Arvaro. En el Fondo Arvaro ellos tienen un mecanismo que es de outgrower, que es de subcontratación, que le alquila a la finca campesina parte de su territorio para plantar eucalipto. Eso ya en el 2021 nosotros habíamos planteado lo que la comunidad donde invierte el Fondo Arvaro, ¿verdad? Que es en el departamento de San Pedro, habíamos explicitado lo que nos dijeron los campesinos, del rechazo que tenían sobre eso, y ellos mismos describían por qué. Porque para ellos el eucalipto destruye la tierra, destruye el agua y destruye sus plantaciones. Entonces, es una forma pasiva, decían. Acá también hay que entender algo porque ante la debilidad de las comunidades campesinas indígenas en una situación de crisis y en una situación de un nivel bajo de organización, porque para organizarse, y esto ya está probado en algunas teorías de la acción social y la acción colectiva, para organizarse hay que tener un mínimo de base material. En una situación tan crítica, es muy difícil elevar el nivel de organización, ¿sí? Y comprender las cosas que están pasando. De igual forma, ellos decían, destruyen y después hay formas pasivas de insertarse en nuestro terreno. Después destruyen nuestra plantación y después nos terminan comprando. Eso hay que entender. Las formas de avance del negocio forestal tienen un carácter más pasivo. No necesita hacer desalojos al estilo sojero ganadero armado, por lo menos hasta hoy, con sus civiles armados, con una lógica más bélica. El negocio forestal tiene una particularidad que es que genera consenso en la comunidad, pero ante una situación de crisis, en la cual el Estado tiene responsabilidad, porque el Estado adhiere a la lógica del Fondo Verde para el Clima, de Proeza, ¿verdad? De avanzar en los territorios campesinos de forma pasiva, ¿sí? Pero desfinancia al sistema campesino indígena. Desfinancia y los campesinos, la Coordinadora de Derechos Humanos del Paraguay y nosotros adherimos a esto de que es un plan sistemático de exterminio del campesinado y los pueblos indígenas, ¿sí? Y en este caso, formas más pasivas de asimilación. Decíamos también el desmantelamiento de las capacidades del sistema campesino. Acá también es importante subrayar eso. Esta debilidad, esta situación de crisis en la que se encuentra y este consenso que generan las organizaciones, que generan estas empresas en las organizaciones ante esa debilidad, ¿verdad? Cómo van pasivamente desmantelando en algunos casos. Acá nosotros también creemos que es pasivo porque el conflicto inicia en la resistencia, no en el ataque. Cuando las organizaciones campesinas e indígenas se empiecen a defender y empiecen a resistir, probablemente, y esta es una hipótesis, se empiece a agudizar los métodos de avance. ¿Por qué decimos esto? Porque ya el nuevo gobierno avisora extender la plantación de eucaliptos, y esas fueron declaraciones explícitas del nuevo gobierno en Paraguay. De las 230.000 hectáreas que tiene hoy en Paraguay, se va a avanzar en 1 millón. Nosotros decimos de dónde van a salir las 770.000 hectáreas que faltan, ¿verdad? Sobre dónde se van a plantar esas. Y también se anuncian 3 plantas de celulosa en Paraguay, ya hay una. En junio volvimos a visitar a las comunidades que están muy cerca de las forestales del Fondo Arvaro, y ellos también nos decían en sus palabras que las plantaciones de eucalipto, ¿sí? eh, están destruyendo ellos perciben así, ¿sí? Acá también hay otro elemento que congenió y decimos, hay que pensar en la lógica de la ciencia. Hay una ciencia, entre comillas, una ciencia que es funcional al negocio forestal y que plantea esto como eh, controversia científica, no está probado. Con la lógica de la controversia científica, gobiernos que están volviendo a producir de forma no sustentable, porque no está probado. Hasta la Unión Europea ahora se va a retractar en que el glifosato no está probado, entonces el glifosato no está mal. Volvamos a las viejas andanzas. En esa lógica, decimos nosotros, parte de las soluciones a este modelo, de las soluciones reales, es el sistema y el modelo y la lógica campesina e indígena, las que de forma milenaria han coexistido entre el ser, la persona, los grupos, las comunidades y la naturaleza. Las soluciones están ahí. Y ahí no hay ciencia en el sentido de estas controversias que financian a entidades científicas para justificar la destrucción del planeta, ¿verdad? Y entonces ellos perciben así. Y acá hay un relato de una de las productoras que decía, esto va desmoralizando. Ellos plantaron mandioca, se arruinó todo y esa pérdida, decía ella, les golpeó, les desmoraliza, entonces van abandonando, van migrando. No es que la forestal APPU va con civiles armados, por lo menos hasta ahora esos casos no aparecen. No es que las empresas que financia el Fondo Arvaro va con civiles armados y con despliegue policial o militar al estilo clásico de los desalojos en Paraguay del modelo sojero y ganadero. Acá están generando controversia, propaganda, asimilación, desmantelamiento pasivo, pero finalmente van avanzando sobre las comunidades campesinas e indígenas. Eso hay que prestar atención. El último censo agropecuario en Paraguay se publicó hace unos días, demuestra fehacientemente lo que nosotros sostenemos, la reducción de las parcelas de la agricultura familiar campesina indígena son catastróficas. Es decir, que el plan sistemático de exterminio del campesinado se da en distintos planos, cultural, material, ¿sí? Y también físico. Ahora, en el negocio forestal, físicamente no hay una desaparición, pero culturalmente los van asimilando, materialmente los van debilitando hasta que forman parte, no son proletarios en el sentido clásico, pero terminan siendo fuerza, mano de obra barata para estas empresas. Y aún más, ni siquiera le tiene que...
Hi,
tiene que
Omar.
sí.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you could begin to wrap up in a minute or two, that would be great. We will hear more from you during Q&A, of course.
Sí. Excelente. Voy cerrando. Entonces decimos, este negocio forestal es una vuelta de tuerca más al agronegocio y al extractivismo. El cambio climático es real, pero en nuestro gobierno adhieren a las falsas soluciones. Hay toda una propuesta de Paraguay Forestal para el Mundo, que es más inversión, más de la lógica de las falsas soluciones. Y acá unas imágenes de lo que decían los campesinos. El maíz se destruye, el maíz se destruye, esas son las plantaciones forestal APPU del Fondo Arbaro, la mandioca se destruye, decían. Y bueno, muchas gracias por el espacio.
Thank you so much, Omar, for that presentation. I think that point that you made about the passivity with which monoculture plantations move, how they can passively destroy ecosystems and dismantle cultures, I think that's a vital point. And this makes them way more insidious than other more obviously hostile takeovers, right? And I think that that's a brilliant point. I really appreciate that. To find out more about what Omar was just talking about, we're very excited to launch his paper today during this webinar. Corina will put the link to the PDF in the chat. And it is there for all of you to download. Right now, the English version is out. The Spanish version should be out sometime around next week. We'll send it to all of your inboxes. Don't worry about it. And we'll send you all the resources as well. This report has all the photographs that Omar was showing us in his presentation and more. All the photographs that were taken by Omar of the hard-growth fund plantations and the farmlands that border them and what's happening there. And it's clear as day for anyone to see. So please, all of you, if you'd like to take a look at the report, please click on that link and you can download it from GFC's website. Thank you again, Omar. And yes, excited to get more into it during the Q&A and discussion. Right now, we're going to move on to the third speaker of the day. We're going to Annabella Lemos. Annabella is an environmental and human rights defender who leads Justicia Ambiental, which has worked to protect the environment and support people affected by climate change and multinational companies' exploitation of Mozambique's natural resources for over 20 years. In 2022, Annabella was awarded the Per Anger Prize from the Swedish government for her fight for farmers forced to leave their homes to make way for gas and coal extraction. Very, very excited to have you here today, Annabella. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks to have the opportunity to talk about. I'm going to talk on the impacts of plantation in Mozambique, but I would like to start to talk a bit about our context and have some photos for you to be inside of what's going on. I can, next slide. Our context in Mozambique being one of the poorest countries in the world, about 46% of our population lives below the poverty line. Mozambique is rich in many natural resources, including land, native forests, and others. But land is for many the only and the most valuable asset. Next, sorry. For many years, our native forest has been logging, destroy in alarm process. And for the last inventory of Mozambique, for 11 years, we lost 8,374,128 hectares of native forest, but they are much more than that. We know that this number is very, what do you call, very safe. Next one. At the same time that our forests are being destroyed, can I go to the next slide? Our government start advocate for plantations as a strategy for reforestation. It was the same time that RED started being debating around the world, and they even changed the law to classify plantations and forests. And that tag of propaganda was the demand of forest products. We're losing forests, but we need the forest products. And then the RED, the reduction of emission for deforestation, degradation of natural resource. And also, this is crazy, but it's what they say. It was one source of income for rural areas. So the next one, please. But now the next, yes. I'm going to talk mostly about two of those big plantations, and many of them, but Portucel and Green Resource. They are Green Resource, they have 264,898 hectares in 3 provinces, and Portucel, they have in 2 provinces, as you see the numbers, but the expectation for having is 356,000 hectares. This is just crazy. Next one. Can go to next. Sorry, I think. As you can see, the difference between what is a forest and what is a plantation. And another big issue that I want to raise here is that our peasant farming and small, you can go to the next. Our present farming and small holding crops only need 2 hectares, but the plantations, what they need is around 100,000 and much more than that. So look into this scenario, and you can see the plantations are growing like crazy. This is recipe for land conflict. Can you, next one, please? So the general impacts, those are for everyone. It's the loss of livelihoods, displacement of 100,000 communities, intimidation, and for me, intimidation, increase of corruption go together because they intimidate the people and then they corrupt the leader that's supposed to defend the people to intimidate the communities and not defending them that is supposed to be how they are leaders for. Food security, destruction of community social structure, and this is very important for rural community. They have their own structure, and a project as big as this one will destroy the social structure, and that women will be much more affected. Of course, the use of pesticide fertilizing and dropout of schooling because of the issues that I'm going to raise in the next slide. Hello? Why women are having additional challenges? They are the most vulnerable social group and more dependent on land. Actually, they are completely dependent on the land and the natural resource. They are the caregivers for the children, the sick, elder, and above everything, they're responsible for collecting the water, the firewood, preparing the meals, and much more things like going to the rivers to wash their clothes, having bath, and everything. And one thing that's very important on the relation of women in the community, they don't have the power of decision. the husband will come home and will say, look, I agree, I'm selling our land or for whatever reasons to the company. So they don't have the voice to take a decision, say, no, I don't want. Next slide, please. Yes. So with the decrease on the income for their livelihood, because they don't have good land, they're not having easy access to water, so the income decreases. So for them to maintain the boys at school, the young girls leave the school. They abandon the school and they start supporting the house chores. They start having a lot of premature marriage, girls as young as 14. We have a case of a 13-year-old girl marry older men, and many times the parents has to pay or receive payment. We have this tradition and culture thing, and I think in many Africa countries do have the same. It's in Mozambique we call lobolo, and it's when a man asks a woman to marry, they have to pay and give presents to the family, to the father and the family of the woman. But this is a total different thing. They need to have less kids because they cannot maintain all of them due to the decrease of income, makes them sell their daughters. Many times we are listening in our field works that women are being forced to perform sexual favors in exchange for promise of employee, access to social responsibility programs, or even to pass through the plantation. We have rural communities in all Mozambique. When one community ends, another one starts. And they're forests, but it's not like the magnificence of the plantation. So they are scared many times to cross the plantation. An increase, the crimes are reported, the theft, rape, and all those sexual abuses that I spoke just now. We can have the next slide. I'm going to read two of the complaints of the women. For them, it's impossible to cross 450 hectares to look for grass or firework. We suffer a lot. Or as women, as we do not wash clothes, and it's difficult to take a bath due to the lack of water. We suffer a lot, and we continue to suffer. We force our daughters to marry because they cannot attend school. This is a woman from a Mesa community that we work. And there's another one and many, many others. We are suffer from water. We don't have all area that it was for wedding. They occupy. We are left homeless. Our land to us, materials, statements, press, it's gone. Next slide, please. This is another woman. You can have another slide. So I'm going to just very quickly talk about this Mozambique Olden Company. I think it's very important to talk about because this is a crime, an environmental crime, and a woman rights constant crime, and nothing is done. We made complaints, and until now we don't have any solution. They giving them 5,000 hectares. They only plant 500 hectares yet, but it's establishing a very ecological sensitive area, very close to Monte Mabu. Monte Mabu, it's the last tropical forest on this side of Africa. There are 4 communities. They live around the mountain, and they live in the forest through all the camps. They have their production and everything. and it's an important biodiversity hotspot that reaches an altitude of 1,700 meters, covering about 7,880 hectares. But for this plantation to be installed in this area, can you give the next slide? They had to destroy native. Can you pass to the next one, please? Okay. They had to destroy and clean huge areas of vegetation, native vegetation, as you can see here. We are there when you talk those foreigners. Shocking. There's nothing we could do. We made a complaint. They didn't do anything. And another big problem this happened is that the communities had to move ahead because they will have the crops in various different places down the mountain, and because they start taking more and more land, they had to burn land for them to have food. So it was another threat to the biodiversity. Can you come to the next one?
Annabella,
Yes.
if you could begin to wrap up in a minute or two, that would be fantastic.
Okay, I can. Can you have a next one, please? Sorry. As I say to you, to find areas, they will go and make the mashambas, it's the crops. And this company, they start burning the crops. They start burning where they keep the crops, as you see in this place. There's been a constant attack to the communities and to women. This case here, they went to this man crop, they burned everything. They burned where he kept the mill and everything. It was shocking. And there was complaints to the police, but nothing is done. Next one, I'll be quickly. The last case that we had in this area was in May this year, an attack to two women. Two women were doing the mashambas, planting the cabbage, and the manager of the company saw them, left the motorbike and attacked the two women. One of the women ran away, and then when she realized that her sister was still being beaten, she returned and attacked the manager of the company. And they both attacked him, and then he bit one of them to run away with his bike. This same man has already assaulted other members of community, men and women, and everything else, with impunity, and continues to walk arrogant through the communities as if he was untouchable. The case is in the police, but nothing done until now. You can see our article here, and I think I can go to the last one. Okay, that's this saying of Michael Cabral: tell no lie, claim no easy victories. It's one thing that gives energy, because to fight those corporations in Mozambique when they are in bed with the government, when our government is completely captured by them, it's very frustrating. But we carry on because we do believe that things can change, and we do believe we cannot give up. But I think I can end this here on the last slide. Obrigada, Kanimambu, obrigada, and thank you. And I think I can wrap up now.
Thank you so much, Annabella, for that sobering report and for sharing with us these stories of what's happening on the ground. You can see that the individuals who represent these private companies often become the embodiments, the physical embodiments of the violence that their companies are perpetrating on the communities. As some of you may know, GFC has a podcast now called Roots of Resilience. We have 2 episodes out already, and more are on its way. Annabella is a guest on one of our upcoming podcast episodes. And in fact, she speaks more about this issue. She speaks about the how gender and plantations, how these two end up in a complex and, as she just spoke, a very violent relationship with each other. And in that podcast, you'll be able to hear more about what's going on. So just a heads up that that's going to come your way. So if you're interested, give Roots of Resilience, GFC's podcast, a listen. Thank you again so much, Annabella, and we're excited to hear more from you during the Q&A. Finally, we have Coraina de la Plaza, who I think all of you already know, GFC's very own forest and climate change campaign coordinator. She has more than a decade of experience bringing attention to climate change and the corporate takeover of forest, biodiversity, and climate policy making at different governance levels. She'll be speaking to us today about why it's imperative that we divest climate finance from harmful plantations. Over to you, Coraina.
Hi everyone, thanks Chitira. I wanted to turn on the camera just for a second to say hi to all of you, but I'll turn it off now because I'm hosting also the webinar, so I want to make sure that nothing fails and that my voice can come across clear and loud. So I'll turn it off now. And first of all, I'd like to thank and also give credits for part of the credits for the presentation that I'm going to deliver to my colleague Soparna Lahiri. You might have seen in the flyers and in the email invitation that we circulated that he was going to be a panelist today, but he had an emergency, unfortunately, and he can't join. So I'm afraid that you are stuck with me. And well, Omar and Annabella have explained and gave quite a lot of details about the impacts that afforestation and reforestation projects that are based on monoculture tree plantations have on communities and on environment. What I'm going to do is to elaborate a bit more about how public climate and forest finance is being used more often than what we might think to support the establishment and also the expansion of these very harmful monoculture tree plantations, making claims that are good for communities and that also that they bring climate mitigation benefits along, which is not the case. So there we go. I will not elaborate a lot on the impacts that plantations have because, as said, I think that my colleagues Annabella and Omar have already done a fantastic job in explaining this, in experiences from the front lines and from the ground and from the grassroots communities. So I'll just remind us again that, of course, plantations are not forests and that have a lot of different impacts, again, on communities, water, soil, biodiversity, do not bring mitigation benefits alone. But I'll just skip this one, for the sake of time. So, and despite the fact that plantations are not forests and that they are actually very often referred to as green deserts for a reason, and that they don't bring benefits that they are claimed to bring, still millions and billions of public, and I want to emphasize this, public climate finance is being poured into these plantations. And here I'm going to mention a few examples of this finance being directed toward these plantations. So one, I think, very good example is the Bond Challenge. The Bond Challenge was launched a while back, I believe in 2011, and the main goal was or still is to bring 150 million hectares of degraded and deforested landscapes into restoration by 2020 and 350 million hectares by 2030. So while removing carbon from the atmosphere, also as Hilda mentioned at the start of the webinar, through restoring forests and other ecosystems is of course vital to tackle the climate crisis, and initiatives like the Bond Challenge can play an important role in this. It sounds great in principle, right? But the thing is that when we take a closer look to these initiatives, they get a little bit uglier, let's say. So the Bond Challenge is actually divided into regional initiatives. And a couple of years ago, we did an analysis of the regional initiative in Africa that is called the African Restoration Initiative, or the AFR 100. And the analysis we did, it looked at the pledges made so far by 30 countries in the region, and what percentage of the pledges were actually plantations. And well, it turned out that as the pledges stand now, half of the 30 countries that are participating in this initiative at the regional level, they have targets involving commercial plantations that fall within or are accounted for their pledges under this initiative. And the thing is that when we put all these pledges together, they involve over 4.5 million hectares of commercial tree plantations, which is of course a lot. And this is the equivalent to a 91% increase in the land area that is now already occupied by commercial plantations in this region. And I can share a link to the analysis later in the chat. And of course, the Bond Challenge and the African Restoration Initiative, in this case, they have a lot of private investors, but also public finance coming from, for instance, from Germany, Norway, France, US, and many others. And they also have blended finance as well. So what it's called also public and private partnerships. Another example that is not in the slide, but I would like to mention, is the Forest Investment Program that is part of the Climate Investment Funds. And it's another of the big players in the multilateral funding landscape. And the FIP, this Forest Investment Program, the FIP target, I think this is in the next slide, actually. Yeah, there we go, sorry. The target is the current target is to have 41 million hectares of sustainable forests. But when you take a closer look at the portfolio and what they mean by this, and the projects that have already been approved and that are being funded and implemented, you find things, or you find projects like one that was approved in Mozambique in 2017 for a total of 1.85 million. This is a grant, actually. One of the main goals of this project it was the afforestation of over 200,000 hectares, mainly with eucalyptus plantations. Some of the donors to the FIP are Australia, Denmark, Japan, Norway, and Spain. Another big player in all of this is the Global Environmental Facility, or GEF, and we had a couple of case studies where, well, we also found that it has put money towards projects that involve the expansion of monoculture tree plantations, including eucalyptus plantations in Brazil, that were researched. These projects saw no climate mitigation whatsoever, but also negative impacts on communities and environments. The project that I'm talking about took place, or is still taking place in a way, in Minas Gerais, in Brazil. And here, just to mention a few of the GEF donors, well, it has more than 40 countries that have or are still giving money to this fund, including both, by the way, developed and developing countries donors. And last but not least, the Green Climate Fund, which is the main climate funding mechanism that is currently operated under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. And this Green Climate Fund is also setting a very dangerous trend in pouring millions for monoculture tree plantations. Well, one of the, before getting into the Arbaro project that also Omar has already touched upon this, let me start with another project that was approved and funded by the Green Climate Fund back in 2018, and it was a project also taking place in Paraguay called PROESA. It was approved to subsidize 32,000 hectares of monoculture tree plantations, eucalyptus monoculture tree plantations. That was the first project that the Green Climate Fund approved that was not fully focused, but had a big component. One of the main components of the project was focused on plantations, on monoculture tree plantations. And then in 2020, we have this funding proposal approved that I said Omar has also mentioned, which is the Arbaro Fund. This was a deeply concerning project involving as well monoculture tree plantations. Arbaro is already a fund. It's private equity fund with an initial investment portfolio of a little over 60 million. And it aimed to mobilize a target of 200 million. So for that, it approached the Green Climate Fund, and they asked for 25 million as equity that in theory would have a multiplier effect for Arbaro to leverage further investment. So the reality is that the Green Climate Fund, what it did was to de-risk private investment in climate finance, and the project involved the plantation of an area of 75,000 hectares across 7 countries in Latin America and in Africa. So Mar mentioned the one that relates to Paraguay, but just to say that this funding proposal and these 25 million of funds that the Green Climate Fund gave to Arbaro also affect other countries like Ghana, Ethiopia, Uganda, Ecuador, and Peru. And different sub-projects have been already approved in these countries. So the fact is that civil society, when this proposal came up, expressed a lot of concern. There was a campaign developed to try to stop the approval of this project. There was a letter that was sent to the Green Climate Fund board, laying out plenty of arguments as to why plantations cannot be funded with any kind of money, but much less with public funds. But still, this project was unfortunately approved. And sorry, I'm meeting people in the webinar while I'm handling the presentation. And another very concerning project that was just approved is the Ungreen proposal. It's mentioned at the bottom of this slide. This project was approved in July of this year. Civil society also raised a lot of concerns about the approval of this proposal because of different, of several reasons. But this project involved a total of 189 million of co-funding by the Green Climate Fund. 9.3 of them were in grant, and the remaining 180 million in loans for the Green Climate Fund. And the Ungreen, this project that was also approved is called, it went for the Ungreen Fund. So it's also a fund that it provides funds to some very large companies that have been involved in several scandals regarding deforestation. These companies include the Brazilian company Marfrig. So this Ungreen is providing seed funds to big companies that work with some of the main drivers of deforestation commodities, which is like cattle ranching intensive. We are talking about, of course, unsustainable intensive cattle ranching, but also palm oil and others. And again, this has been subsidized by the Green Climate Fund through approving this project in July. And I've been talking mainly about public funds, but to all of this, we have to add millions that have been poured also by the private sector as part of standalone projects, but also as co-finance. And I'm going to give a very concrete example that we found just a few days ago. That's Development Bank, which is, by the way, also involved in different capacities in the Ungreen project, but also in our Barrel Fund and other projects. But anyway, the FMO, that is the Dutch acronyms for the Dutch Development Bank, just posted on its website a few days ago that they intend to fund with 40 million to Susano in the B tranche of an existing loan transaction that was arranged in 2022. Now, Susano is an integrated forestry pulp and paper company founded in Brazil that currently manages 2.6 million hectares of so-called forests, but 1.6 million of those hectares are actually eucalyptus plantations. And Susano has actually been already repeatedly denounced by civil society, and it has been involved in different scandals in Brazil, but also in other countries where it operates, like in Mozambique as well. So just you get an idea that on top of all of these millions and billions of climate public finance being poured into these very problematic and deeply concerning projects, then we also have the private sector contributing to making all of this worse.
Hi, Corina.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but can we begin to wrap up?
Yes, this is the last slide. I'll wrap up in just a minute. So in closing, I would say that, this divestment from monoculture tree plantations and other false solutions has it to a stop. And this public finance should be redirected. So climate finance must support real solutions to the climate crisis that recognize historical responsibility, a common but differentiated response, and the rights and traditional knowledge and wisdom of indigenous people, women in all their diversity, and also local communities as well, of course. Just to mention that the Global Forest Coalition, together with our member groups, we are in the process of developing a campaign to facilitate this divestment process. And we will actually like to invite, we're in the process of inviting climate justice movements, indigenous peoples organizations, women and gender rights groups, and allies to join in this global campaign to demand developed countries, but also the UN and other multilateral agencies to divest public climate finance from these false solutions and redirect this climate finance and fiscal policies as well to support communities and gender just and community govern real solutions through non-market approaches. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks.
Thank you, Corina, for really crunching the numbers behind these so-called solutions. And it goes to show how many billions, how many thousands of billions of dollars are available to mitigate climate change in reality. But the will to use them in the right place, the will to direct them to communities, to indigenous peoples, to real solutions is what's missing. And that's where I think we all come in. That's where webinars like this come in, where we're able to speak to each other, connect with each other, and to move towards collective action, right? But thank you so much again, Corina. And I think we all have questions about a lot of the things that were discussed today. And so we're going to transition straight into the Q&A and the discussion part of today's proceedings. So feel free to put your hand up, or if you are not in a place where you can speak, feel free to put your question in the chat and I will read it out. But the floor is basically open. If you'd like to direct your question to a particular panelist, feel free to do so, or if it's something that you would like responses from all of them on, feel free to mention that. But yeah, the floor is yours, dear listeners. Thank you so much to everyone who's stayed with us throughout. So yeah, we are now open for questions. Does anyone want to go? Yes, Helena, go ahead. You can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those amazing presentations. I just feel a sort of despair because having worked on these issues for many, many years, I just see the same thing continuing, only getting worse. And I feel that we're not going to get anywhere unless we tackle the actual structure of these corporations and banks, because they have so much impunity, so much more power than governments, which are corrupt, as we know. It's just very difficult to know how we can confront that without questioning the the structures that they have that were acquired illegally. But I don't find enough discussion about that, about their free speech rights, their rights, or the obligation to return profits and so forth, which they're trying to conceal, and all this public relations talk that is so successful. I mean, it was extraordinary hearing Omar talk about that. So I suppose my question is, how can we up our game? We've been fighting this for so long. So how can we fight more successfully? Not that I'm saying anything against anybody. I really support all of it, and thank you for your amazing work, but things are getting worse. Thank you.
Would any of the panelists like to respond to that? Omar, Annabella, Hilde, Corina. Go ahead, Hilde.
It's not that I have a response immediately, and I was also waiting for Omar and Helena to come with solutions from the ground. And Helena, I hear you. I've also been in this field for over 25 years, and I agree with you that things are even getting worse. So I don't have solutions immediately. I think it all boils down a lot to, governance. So, for instance, in many of these countries, the customary rights of communities are unclear. Land rights are unclear. FPIC procedures are not being properly processed, etc. So I think in all these cases, we really have to confront those that invest, like the public institutions, with the fact that they are actually dealing with companies that are violating all these rights constantly. And I know that we've done that for the last 20 years, so I may be not saying anything new, but I think that we can't do anything more than keep on confronting them with the fact that they are just, cooperating with these big companies that are violating our rights. I think that's what I would say as a first answer, but I'm happy to give floor to Omar and Helena to also speak from the ground, and maybe they see also new ways to come in.
Annabella, would you like to respond?
Sure. As said before, we are on this struggle for 20 years or more, and it's difficult, and yes, it's true, it's getting worse and very scary, because our governments are being captured, and our governments are part of the problem in a way. So, but I also believe that as things are getting worse, there will be a turn of the wave and things will change. And I do believe that we need to carry on doing what we do, and to link and to raise mostly the human rights violations, and that how wrong it is, those solution. And for Africa now, and I believe all the global south, the main proposal of false solutions now, and red and carbon credits, and it's scary. And I think we need to start using legal processes, even if it doesn't work. Like in Mozambique, we've been complaining, we've been putting cases, and nothing is done. Someday, things will happen. And I think there's 2 points that it's very important. It's human rights violations and the climate crisis we live in. We need to link those and start thinking very serious on litigation, and carry on supporting communities like we do.
Thank you, Annabella. Omar, I want to come to you if you want to add anything to that.
Sí, pero creo que Rubén también pidió la palabra. Podríamos escucharle y después, o igual.
Sure. Ruben, was that a response or was that another question? I wasn't sure I was going to come.
Well, I had a question for Omar, basically, but it also builds a lot on what Helena asked, more in general terms. My question is, or was intended for Omar, because he spoke very eloquently about the totality of the devil, and I was wondering how, in your context, Omar, is the devil being tackled? Because there might be a few ranches or farms or plantations here and there that organization can do research on and try to change through advocacy. But is there a bigger movement going on that tries to tackle the more systemic issue at the level of Paraguay? And then, as Helena said, there's more to it than just national context. But yeah, I was wondering, in the same vein as Helena's question, what kind of counter movement is like trying to do anything in Paraguay and can we nurture that elsewhere? Thanks.
Sí, muchas gracias, Rubén y Elena. Yo estoy de acuerdo también con lo que planteaban las compañeras antes. No hay una fórmula, ¿sí? Pero sí hay un diagnóstico y sí hay esferas de la problemática. Mi sesgo desde la ciencia política claramente me hace pensar en las relaciones de fuerza, es decir, necesitamos articular las distintas esferas de resistencia a este gran demonio, digamos. Es decir, no es suficiente con el movimiento ambientalista si está separado del movimiento de mujeres, si está separado del movimiento sin tierras, campesinos, indígenas, estudiantes. Es decir, es necesario que empecemos a pensar, y eso insistimos mucho en Paraguay, y Genyoy siempre hace este esfuerzo de articular, ¿sí?, el campo, la ciudad, los sujetos, siempre que hacemos estudios, y ese es un principio ético y político de Genyoy. No nos satisface en términos académicos de exponer los datos, sino siempre que construimos un dato que les sirva a las comunidades y a los territorios a los que vamos para que se genere un proceso, decimos, de politización. Yo hace rato mencionaba lo de los eucaliptos. No está en la órbita de los campesinos y de los indígenas eso como un problema. Es decir, primero es necesario conceptualizar, articular con estas esferas, entender cómo les afecta y después ellos van entendiendo, ellos se van apropiando y ellos van resistiendo. Pero el proceso es muy largo, el proceso es complejo, ¿verdad? Y eso en San Pedro, en Santaní, donde están Forestal Apepú, eso vimos. Pero en donde está Paracel, que es esta planta de celulosa, una de las más grandes de la región que se está instalando ahora, el nivel de consenso que tienen las comunidades es complicado, ¿verdad? Entonces, esta idea de conectar cómo es que les afecta y ellos van pensando, ellos van planteando, pero capacidad de resistir, decían, no hay. No hay porque la debilidad, la situación de crisis en la que se encuentra frente a una empresa gigante que viene a ofrecer trabajo, dice, si yo salgo en contra a la empresa, mis familiares, mis compañeros, mis compañeras se van a... Entonces es muy complicado entrar ahí a cuestionar y a partir de ahí politizar. Entonces se acordó que el proceso esté orientado a elevar los costos de la inversión de la planta de celulosa, tratar de rebatir y de refutar todo lo posible, pero no se puede parar. Y eso es, como decía Elena hace rato, eso es desesperante. A mí me encantaría que la estrategia fuese otra, de resistencia activa y que se vayan del Paraguay, pero en una situación que está preparada para que el campesino y el indígena salga de su sistema, entonces la oportunidad de trabajo es casi como un suspiro, ¿verdad? Entonces un poco eso es lo que yo podría aportar. No hay una fórmula. Sí vemos con optimismo, respondiendo un poco a lo que decía Rubén, y venimos acompañando activamente como Genioy con el cuerpo y con la mente, una articulación campesina indígena que se empieza a dar a partir del año 2021. Están articulándose, comienza de forma reactiva, ¿sí? Es decir, comienza esta articulación histórica. En Paraguay, el Estado, digamos, y las clases dominantes hicieron que el campesinado vaya por su lado y los indígenas por su lado. Y en los últimos años se empiezan a encontrar, primero para resistir los desalojos, ¿sí? Y ahora, en los últimos tiempos, se articulan de forma ya más proactiva. Entonces vemos un optimismo, porque esa es una novedad de la historia política del Paraguay. Y todos estos temas se están haciendo cuerpo en estos sujetos. El problema es que si Genioy entiende el problema de la eucaliptación, el negocio forestal y el cambio climático, pero no hay sujeto que resista y que acompañe, que es este movimiento campesino indígena, es muy difícil. Entonces sí hay un movimiento que está politizando estos temas, que está articulando las distintas esferas de las que hablaba al principio, pero todavía es incipiente, entonces hay optimismo, hay esperanza, a pesar de que el demonio es grande, y bueno, y apostamos ahí, apostamos a eso, va por ahí y va en la medida que el nivel y el grado de articulación con los demás sujetos y actores nos permita avanzar, creo que es posible, ¿verdad? Eso.
Thank you, Omar, for that powerful reminder and for that note of hope. Much needed in these times. Thank you again. Philip, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for hosting this webinar on such a important day, struggle against these tree plantations. And I was just wondering about the previous question, because change, it doesn't seem as if things are getting better, it's only getting worse. And I think people really start reacting when they recognize and realize how these plantations are impacting on us as an integrated community. And I was really happy to see the article in the New York Times. I think it was entitled, "We thought we were saving the earth, but we were planting a time bomb." And it was linked to all of these incredible, devastating fires, especially burning in Canada, raging out of control. And of course, most of those plantations or those forests are commercial forests. Where the emphasis, of course, is maximum biomass production. And it was good for me to see in this one article how the timber industry and the model that we've applied can be or is in part responsible for this devastating impact of the fires globally, really. So I think it is important to raise that issue more prominently, that these fires are also as a result of our greed in the timber industry. And then just to say that there's been some really interesting articles coming out of the timber industry locally in South Africa about serious problems with soil sustainability. Under these fast rotation monocultures, soils are being depleted. So I think the industry themselves are starting to realize that they have to change. So hopefully we can put some more pressure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Philip. Absolutely. This year, more mainstream publications, including business newspapers, called out capitalism, calling it as such, naming it as one of the causes of continued climate change. So yeah, things are getting worse, but things are also getting better. In some ways faster than we had imagined possible, I think. Hilda, go ahead.
Yeah, to add on what Philippe was saying, there is indeed also a spark of hope here, because indeed we see now articles coming up about the fact that many of our forests, of what is being called forests, but what are actually plantations, are becoming a source of carbon instead of a sink of carbon. And we do see, it was I think last week in that Canada is actually becoming, the forests of Canada are becoming a source of carbon. In Germany we see likewise articles. So I do believe that at some point our policymakers and these companies realize that ultimately it is also backfiring on themselves. And we also see that in the whole carbon credit market. We've seen now scandal after scandal after scandal. And what we now see is that companies are really backtracking on using carbon credits. It's not huge at the moment. It's not, it's still out there. It's still a big market, but we do see some companies that, are hesitant in using carbon credits because of the publicity around carbon credits, negative publicity. So it is a spark of hope, I think, that the more we get those kinds of articles out there showing what is really happening on the ground, the more investments will move towards real solutions, hopefully.
Thank you, Hilde. Corina, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just very quickly, because I just realized that it's the time now. Just to add another like a spark of hope a little bit. I agree, things of course seems to be getting worse, and it's a little bit it's very frustrating when you are working on these issues to keep on finding these projects, this funding, these horrible impacts on the ground. But I said, to add a spark of hope, I feel that, at least in my experience in the that I've been doing this kind of work, there has been a change to the good. For instance, a few years ago, I was the civil society official observer for the forest investment program, and when these horrible projects came up, and I had to confront policy and decision makers about how monoculture tree plantations are a horrible idea, the impacts that they have on the ground, why those projects shouldn't be approved, and why public taxpayers climate finance shouldn't be used to support that. They looked at me like, what are you saying? This girl is crazy. Of course it's a great idea. It brings benefits to the communities, economic, blah blah blah. Now when you talk to policy and decision makers, the discourse has changed a little bit. So now they understand that the plantations have negative impacts, that they don't bring, most of them start to understand, let's say not all of course, that they don't bring climate mitigation benefits, and so on and so forth. So I do feel that there is a change. Things are starting to change very slowly, and of course let's not be naive. If they do understand these things, they have a lot of pressure and interest behind, and they have their own agendas, etc. But just to say that, I feel things are starting to change a little bit, and for that I think it's really important, the work that groups on the ground are doing in collecting this evidence of the impacts that these horrible projects have. So this can be shown and bring up to the policy and decision maker that, hey, this is what you are, this is what happens when you decide to approve something like this. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Corina. I'm so glad this conversation about hope and positive news was kicked off, because I don't know about you all, but I really needed to hear this, especially after the presentations. I really needed to hear this. So I'm so glad that we had this conversation. So I hate to say it, but we're out of time. So I want to thank everyone who made this event possible. Our speakers, Hilde Stroet, Omar Yampe, Annabella Lemos, and of course, Corina de la Plaza, for demystifying some very complex themes for us. and really delivering to us the essence of why it's important that we continue our collective work on this, and with urgency, right? Thank you to everyone who participated in the Q&A. Thank you to everybody who listened, talked through the chat. We will be back to you. We'll get back to you with all of the resources, all the papers that we mentioned today. We will send you an email with everything that you need to read and watch and everything. Thank you to our interpreters, our tech support folks, and of course the rest of the team at GFC for giving us another opportunity to come together. So thank you all, and have a good day, night, day, evening, morning, wherever you are. And yeah, it's good seeing you all. Thank you so much.